Hello and welcome to episode 15 of series 4 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from The Big Picture People. I'm just going to keep this introduction very brief. I'm just going to tell you what we've got coming up in our next couple of episodes. So on the 1st of August, we have an interview with Paul Tawal. Paul is from Team Dare, and Paul is going to be telling us all about the importance of investing in our employee engagement processes within our businesses. He's got some very interesting statistics and some very interesting experience that he's going to share with us on that episode. And then following that, on the 15th of August, I have an interview with Jen O'Ryan, and Jen is from Double Tall Consulting, and Jen's business is all very much around how we build in inclusivity, diversity and representation into our communications, which may sound like something that you're doing at the moment. I'm sure many organizations at the moment are working on DE&I initiatives, but Jen's got some really interesting experience and very subtle differences that we can make in our communications that make sure that they are inclusive, diverse and fully representative of the people who work in our organizations. So that's what we've got coming up in future episodes. That's all I'm going to talk about before we get into today's interview, and hope you enjoy it and find it a useful conversation. One of the reasons we formed the Big Picture People 20 odd years ago is because we were deeply frustrated in the organizations we worked in at the time about the lack of connection between the people working at the front line of the organization and the people working in the senior management teams in the higher echelons of the organization, in the C-suite, I guess we would call it now, although we didn't call it back then. And the problem was in an organization like the one I was working with at the time, that was a deep frustration where we had 4,000 people working in teams scattered across the globe, trying to deliver sort of targets and objectives when there really wasn't a coherent message coming from the top. So one of the things that we wanted to develop while we were internal to that organization was a way of aligning people to what the organization was all about. So helping people to understand what our big goals were. We ended up calling them blue chips. These were the sort of things that as an organization we couldn't fail on, the strategic goals throughout the year. And we developed our visual approach, the Big Picture People approach to communicating that so that we could align those 4,000 people across the organization to that strategic view. So my guest today, when we met, we were talking about this phenomena, and he has a very similar philosophy, and his approach is similar to ours, but in a different way. He's focused on helping organizations to build this hierarchy of needs all the way up from starting from what their goals and their mission and their vision is, through to the organizational capabilities they needed to be able to deliver that, and then how they're going to implement it. And all of that is centered around this concept of what is their most important goal. And he works with organizations to help them to work on that at a strategic level, but then also delivers Kaizen and continuous improvement events to help them to be able to deliver that at the front line. And most importantly, get their frontline employees involved in actually delivering the how and helping them to understand how they can deliver that. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this interview, today's interview. We've got a conversation where we're going to be looking at what is it that organizations struggle with when it comes to aligning their organizational strategy and activities within the organization. And we're also going to be looking at what this idea of the most important goal and how we can really drill into that and give organizations a real clarity of purpose around that, which means that everybody is pointing in the same direction and striving towards the same end. So that's what today's interview is all about. It's all about how we communicate strategic intent within our organization and make sure we've got that alignment. My guest today is Jim Gitney. Jim is the founder and CEO of E15 Consulting and a member of the board of advisors for Thin Air. Jim is a strategy, operations, and supply chain subject matter expert. He has been an executive chairman, a board member, a CEO, a COO, and has had a number of assignments in other business development areas, marketing, sales, and operations. He has hands-on experience of working in over a dozen different industries and functional organizations. So good day to you, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous. Greetings from Southern California, Craig.
Thank you. I was going to ask you where you are, but you've told us Southern California, so I'm sure the our certainly our guests in the Northern Hemisphere and in Northern Europe at the moment are kind of envious of that. Whereabouts in Southern California are you, Jim?
So I'm about 50 miles south of Los Angeles International Airport in a town called Huntington Beach.
Lovely.
So we live next to the beach, and normally I have my window open, but with seagulls in the background, I decided we probably wouldn't uh, rub that issue in too much.
So that's on the Pacific Beach, yeah. You're right on the Pacific there, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Wonderful, wonderful, fantastic. So I've given a brief introduction there to you, Jim. I guess in your own words, do you want to what do you want to elaborate on? Tell us a little bit more about that career that you've got, and also maybe how it's led to what you're doing now.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity, Craig. My career is 45 years old, and I spent the first 25 years of my career in corporate America with companies like GE, Black and Decker, Sunbeam, and Rainbird. And in 2004, I decided that I wanted to start sharing the knowledge that I had gained with other companies
Mm,
and formed Group 50 Consulting. Over the last 20 years, we've worked with over 200 companies. And during my career, I've noticed that the reason that companies don't realize the value of their intended strategies is because of a lack of alignment and accountability throughout the organization. And of course, you talk to that a lot. I've seen a bunch of your webinars and
mm,
podcasts and talk to that subject in depth.
mm,
So in 2013, I created something called the business hierarchy of needs. And it's structured to be able to allow a senior leadership team to look at the needs of their business based on one most important goal and the supporting strategies for that one most important goal.
mm,
And there's 29 elements in the business hierarchy of needs. And I laugh a little bit about that because in today's Twitter focused society where we want to have everything in 240 bits, reality is that businesses do all of these 29 things.
mm,
Things like compensation, hiring practices, understanding their value proposition, mission, vision, values, all the types of things that there's been many books written on. And so what we wanted to do was take the business hierarchy of needs and create a process that allows an organization to think about how to point all 29 things
mm,
toward one most important goal.
mm,
And we do that along with our strategic planning structure called Where to Play and How to Win. Now, think about it for a second. I think in one of your webinars, you said that, what was it, 20% of the organization understands what the company's trying to do, which
mm.
means that 80% don't.
Yeah, yeah.
And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to create something that people throughout an organization easily understand. The concept of one most important goal, whether it's to double profits or to double enterprise value, which is different,
Mm,
or to triple market share, or to whatever that most important goal is in one statement, it's easy to communicate to people throughout the organization.
yeah.
Where to play and how to win is something we learn about the very first time we step on a soccer pitch, or we walk into a baseball game, or we compete in any kind of sport, because we go through the process of understanding where we're going to play and what the rules of the game are, and we figure out strategies on how to win. And perhaps it's practice drills, perhaps it's uh, special classes on something that we don't do specifically well. But what we're doing when we figure out how to win in any situation is fine tuning our skills to be able to make us as effective as possible.
Mm. Okay.
So what we've done is we've created an approach that allows us to communicate those three tenets to everyone throughout the organization.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, we'll come back to those and go through those three tenets in a moment, and also explore this idea of most important goal. You kind of alluded to some data that I've used in my webinars, which is there's sort of 20% of people understand the strategy, and a lot of that data comes from the kind of pretty old research, and I've not found any sort of significant shifts in that, and that was from the Kaplan and Norton balanced scorecard, which is probably going back to the 90s now. But in terms of, and I think it sort of aligns with some of the data that I know you've talked about, or you when we spoke, we discussed this as well. Is that is that something you find? Is that when you go into an organization, there tends to be this, it's not through a lack of a well thought out strategy, but it's just that when you go and talk to people around the organization, it's kind of garbled or indistinct in terms of their understanding, in terms of when you ask them to play it back to you and say, well, what is it we're trying to do, and why is that important, and what are our kind of must win battles or must win goals and those sorts of things. Is that something you tend to find? I guess you do, because that's how you make a living. But is that a kind of a phenomenon that you're familiar with, Jim?
Yes, it is, Craig. And what's amazing is that many senior leadership teams.
Mm,
Now, I've done consulting in 11 different countries and have done work in over 30 countries, and don't find the statistics significantly different
mm,
from country to country or culture to culture.
mm,
What I find is that senior leadership teams spend a lot of time creating wonderful strategies, and perhaps they're huddled together for weeks on end. And they're now challenged with how to communicate that to the rest of the organization, people
mm,
who aren't involved or engaged in helping to create that strategy. And so what happens then is leadership now has a quandary.
mm,
And that quandary is, what can I reasonably communicate to people throughout the organization? And am I giving up trade secrets? And am I, will they understand what we're talking about? And what we find is that when we break it down into very simplistic components, again, most important goal, where to play, which is going to be the markets that we're going to serve, and how to win, which are the things that we're going to do, we can communicate that through the organization. When we do a strategic planning project with a client, before we even have the strategic plan done, we ask them to define their most important goal.
mm,
And then we immediately ask them to communicate that to people throughout the organization, and ask them to question everything they're doing around how that supports the most important goal.
mm-hmm,
And we very quickly find out that we have a lot of creative and talented resources in the organization who now have a bit of focus,
mm,
who now have a litmus test for what they're doing. And we begin to see immediate results, because now I can walk through the organization and say, what's the most important goal of the company? And they can talk about it.
yeah,
So we immediately address that 10 or 20% who know what's going on, but we also immediately address the 90% who don't,
yeah, yeah,
the 80 or 90% who don't. So that's step one. And that satisfies the, tell me a couple steps in which I can start doing this.
yeah, yeah,
The next thing we do is begin the strategic planning process, but we encourage our clients not to keep it in the C-suite,
mm,
not just to have the people who report to the CEO uh, do it, but to bring middle level leaders in as well.
mm,
Because if they're part of creating the strategy, the how, they're going to be much more, they're going to understand it much better and why we're doing it. But they're also going to be able to more easily communicate it to other levels in the organization.
Mm, mm, mm.
And interestingly enough, I've talked to a lot of strategic planning professionals, and their initial response is, well, you're asking me to change my strategic planning process. And the answer is no, we're not. What we're talking about is giving you some ideas and some thoughts on how to better implement your strategic plan.
Yeah.
And so, Gallup, the Gallup group put together a chart for my book, Strategy Realize the Business Hierarchy of Needs. And in their studies, fully engaged organizations have a pot of gold they can go after. And some of the numbers are pretty telling. 23% increase in profitability,
Wow.
18% increase in productivity, 66% increase in well-being. And I think we'll all agree that well-being is an incredibly important part of today's workforce, remote workforce, a post-pandemic workforce. And then the last one that I think is pretty telling is an 81% reduction in absenteeism.
Wow.
That's the pot of gold that's available to organizations that figure out how to better engage the people throughout throughout the company.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've answered a question I was going to ask you, which is why I guess it's for us who work in this area, and for many people, I guess probably listening, it's an obvious why we should care about this. But I guess for some people, it's like, well, does it really matter if our people don't understand, what it is we're trying to do as an organization? You've just answered that question with some of those metrics, and I guess intuitively, it's kind of like, how can we potentially, if you like, you've used sort of sporting analogies already, but how can we possibly, if you would think of it as a sports team, go on the field and win whatever sport it is, if we don't know how we're meant to be playing and what the goal is and which way we're facing, it's very, very difficult. And I think a lot of organizations, it can be as stark as that, really, in terms of that lack of clarity. You've talked about this business hierarchy. You call it the business hierarchy of needs. I'm being really careful not to sort of talk, because obviously we're all probably familiar with another hierarchy of needs. Do you want to just elaborate on that a little bit? I know it's kind of difficult in an audio context to sort of talk through a hierarchy or potentially something that would be more visual. Do you want to just talk us through that, Jim? And you may have already covered some of those points in that hierarchy of needs already.
I'd love to, Craig. So what I think you're talking about is the 1943 seminal paper by Abraham Maslow and
Yeah.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah, yeah.
So Maslow talks about the needs of individuals,
Mm,
and you have psychological needs, but you have also a need to feel love and belonging,
mm,
and some other needs that are very personal. And you need to go through those levels in order to realize self-actualization.
mm-hmm.
Now, take that concept and apply it to people inside a business.
Mm,
So not only as a business leader, do I have to satisfy their personal needs, but I also need to satisfy their professional needs.
yeah.
You can take that and you can apply it to teams of people as well. Because I view a team of people the equivalent to an individual. They're, one mind, one focus, one body that have been given that are challenged with delivering something, whether it's a business process or it's a new product or
Mm-hmm.
it's a piece of automation. And then you can take that same concept and apply it to the business itself. And so the reason we created the business hierarchy of needs, which has 3 levels. Level 1 is building a strong foundation with your mission, vision, values, leadership traits, strategic objectives. The most important goal, which, going back to your sporting analogy, is the scorecard.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine a rugby game where no one's keeping score.
Mm-hmm.
And so we find ourselves in a situation where we can take the basic concepts of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and apply it to a business
Mm.
and the teams that are inside the business and the people who are inside those teams. And what we've done is put together that format and that process to address the unique needs of each business.
Yeah. So you mentioned the first level there, which is the vision, the values, the mission. How you said it's 3 levels. What are the next 2 levels up, Jim?
So, level one is about strategy, analysis, and planning. That builds the strong foundation. And it's primarily owned by the C suite. But as I said before, it has heavy involvement from mid level leaders.
Mm.
Level two is about knowledge and change management. It's
Mm.
about if I want to double the size of the company, what do I need to do inside the organization in order to be able to prepare people and teams to be able to realize our most important goal?
Mm.
And I call that the bridge between strategy and results.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Level three is about implementation.
Mm.
And that's all about continuous improvement. And it's all about, but before I jump there, level two is primarily owned by mid level leaders.
Yeah.
C suite's still involved, but now we take that next step and get more of the rest of the organization involved. Then we go to level three, which is implementation.
Okay.
That's how do I make decisions around how to leverage technology, how to redesign business processes, how do I use continuous improvement tools in order to make changes inside the operating environment to move to our most important goal.
Mm.
But every time I am in any level and I come up with an idea for a solution, I always ask, how does this get us closer
Mm.
to our most important goal?
Mm.
I like to say, Craig, that the most important goal is the politically correct way to say no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if it doesn't get us, if you can't demonstrate how something I want to do gets us to our most important goal, then it's never brought to the table.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
there's 3 levels. Implementation is the equivalent of self-actualization,
Mm.
and it again fits that entire model.
Yeah, I like that, and I like the way for me, the way you've described it anyway, as it goes from probably, um, I guess a lot of organizations tend to focus. I'm thinking out loud here, but I guess when we think about a lot of organizations, their preoccupation is usually on the top of that pyramid, which is not that's the wrong thing to do. But without those kind of organizational capability foundations in the middle that you've talked about, level two, and then actually having a well thought out strategy and a coherent kind of sense of direction and a north star. Often you get a lot of activity at the top and implementation, but there's no real joined up aspects of that implementation. You've got silos doing their own thing and kind of implementing what they think's important, but it's not connected. And I see how that hierarchy that you've just described there makes sure that there's that kind of line of sight between, the kind of maybe what some people may see as the more abstract level at the bottom, which is the kind of the vision, the mission, the kind of things that are in the future, and that we may have to kind of evolve our actions to in order to deliver, but then moving towards the more concrete, which we can tend to see and feel, which is that sort of action and activity that at the top of the organization, which I think you've alluded to is kind of where the rubber hits the road. So in that respect, the triangle is kind of the top of the triangle is where the point is this sort of where it meets contact, I guess, with reality. Yeah, it's a really clear sort of structure, and I like that. In terms of the most important goal, that kind of runs alongside this. That's the sort of I'm visualizing this as a triangle with the arrow being the kind of most important goal, which is sort of runs through the whole. Is the sort of the golden thread that runs through this. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, that
yeah,
is correct.
yeah, yeah.
Everything, including the business strategies, have to be focused toward helping achieve the most important goal.
Mm.
Yeah. Craig, I have an MBA and in strategic planning and finance.
Mm,
And we were taught that companies should have between 3 and 5 business strategies.
mm,
And to complicate the matter of alignment and accountability in the organization is when we do strategic planning work with our clients, we often find that the strategies aren't linked together.
mm,
And they sometimes will conflict with each other. But we use a 5 why exercise
mm,
when we go into a company who already has a strategic plan. And we go, why are you doing this? Why do you want to do this strategy? And what often happens is when we ask the 5 whys, which is a continuous improvement tool, when we ask the 5 whys around the most important goal, strategies are modified.
mm,
They may not be eliminated, and we might add another one. But at the end of the day, what we find is that when the most important goal is the litmus test for everything we do, that it has an impact on business strategies that have already been formulated.
mm,
Once we've done that, it's pretty easy to put together a set of projects and programs with the appropriate KPIs and charter the appropriate teams with the appropriate measures throughout the organization in order to make sure, in order to allow everyone to understand their role in achieving the most important goal.
mm,
So I often say that, as I said earlier, we communicate the most important goal immediately so people can start thinking about it. And then the rest of the process is around engaging them and understanding and agreeing to things that they can do to help the company achieve the most important goal. At the end of the day, Craig, we want to be led. We
mm,
need to be led. And it doesn't matter whether you are in the C-suite. As the CEO, I wanted to be led as well, which is why I have a board of directors.
mm,
And in other levels of the organization, we want to be led. We want to know the from what to what by when, and because that allows us to understand by understanding the most important goal and understanding the from what to what by when, it allows us to understand how we are part of something bigger.
mm, mm,
And that's important in today's workforce. The next piece is we want to be part of the how.
mm,
Now, I've done over 200 Kaizen events during my career, either led or participated in over 200 Kaizen events, which for those of your listeners who might not know what that is, it's basically a 1 week exercise where you get the people who own a business process together and give them permission to change that process
mm,
with
mm,
a very, very aggressive set of targets. We've done over 200 of these and only 2 have ever failed.
mm,
Now, as soon as I say that, the 2 that failed, the team that did it were so dismayed by that result that they begged for the opportunity to redo the project.
mm,
And those ended up being the 2 best projects we ever had.
mm,
So, what I'm suggesting here is that when you engage people in being part of the how, they're now locked in because they made the recommendations on what to change and what to do differently.
mm,
And so they now have ownership and accountability to their recommendations. And it's pretty amazing. I did a survey when I was running Black and Decker's appliance factory in North Carolina. I had 2,000 employees, and I did a survey, and over 200 of them had bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and built race cars and programmed computers, things that were required far higher skill levels than what they needed on the shop floor. And when we asked them if they wanted to take some of those skills and apply them to our most important goal and be part of the how they jumped at the opportunity. This
Mm-hmm.
leads to that statistic that you identified, that Gallup identified, that 52% of people feel disengaged.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Making them part of the how gets accountability, alignment, and engagement. And it's a simple process. But all and all the things that I've talked about takes the load off, some of the load off the shoulders of the senior leadership team. And it's
Definitely.
easy to do, and the results are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, we worked with a client, and it was one of the most, and it was so simple how they did it. Is the way that their leaders led was very much around, the kind of setting intent, the clarity of intent. So really making sure that people understood, and I guess that's another way of articulating, the kind of most important goal. It was really clear on what our intentions are as an organization, and then not just empowering as in kind of everybody. It's kind of everybody talks about empowerment, and you go into organizations that talk about empowerment, and usually they're the most controlling. but these guys really did. They sort of articulate, their leaders articulated intent. People were empowered to work out, because they were the skilled people who knew how to deliver that intent. They were the technicians. They were the people who knew how to kind of execute what they did in order to deliver that intent. And then they got people to come back to them and say, tell me what our intent is, play it back to me, but also tell me how what you're doing and how your contribution is helping us to deliver that intent. So I know as a leader, you've understood what that intent is, but I understand that you are using your skills to the best of your ability. And if I'm happy with that, you've got my support. I will give you all the tools, the resources, the time, as much as I can, and I'll be your kind of servant leader to help you deliver that. Rather than, you kind of think, and it was so simple. And you think how a lot of organizations lead, which is, kind of, here's the strategy, here's how you're going to do it. I'm going to micromanage you. And you, as you say, that's where for me, a lot of this, 50 odd, 60 odd, however many percentage, depending on which survey you look at, of people are kind of just completely switched off, feel as though they're not able to bring any discretionary effort. They just feel hemmed in and boxed in, and they're just a pair of hands. And I think but it's so simple if you can create that clarity and that North Star, and you can just get your leaders to just, their role is to make sure everybody understands it, and then that they understand how they can best contribute to it. And then my job is to support them to be able to deliver that. And it's so elegant, and yet so few organizations do it. It was so nice to see it being done, not just lip service, but actually being delivered as well. And I think that kind of aligns with a lot of your kind of principles and approaches as well, Jim.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We have, as I said, worked with over 200 companies.
Mm.
We use the business hierarchy of needs for every project we do. And that includes redesigning business processes, building new factories, optimizing supply chains, because it applies anywhere in the organization. And often, what we do is when we do an assessment or a diagnostic, phase two of the project is what we call an implementation workshop.
Right.
And that's where we get heavy into the business hierarchy of needs and make sure that we've ticked the elements, all 29. We've addressed all 29 elements in the business hierarchy of needs. We do it with the senior leadership team and middle level leaders. And when we come out of the implementation workshop, that team is fully engaged and fully committed and has agreed to the set of projects that are going to be done in order to implement our recommendations, or at least the portion of our recommendations that they're comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by engaging many people throughout the senior leaders don't understand how much talent they have inside their organization. And by engaging those skill sets and that talent, what you really need to do is give them the opportunity and stand back and watch how you can achieve amazing results.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Jim, we're getting towards the end of our conversation. Are there any things that you wanted to highlight that we've maybe I haven't asked you the right questions, or that we've not covered it yet? Is there anything else of significance? I think we've covered it off quite elegantly in terms of the kind of high level ideas that you've got. Anything that you want to say before we kind of just bring things to a conclusion? Because I'm going to ask you about your book as well, because I know you've got a book, and I want to give you a chance to talk about that. But before we do that, anything else you want to say, Jim?
No, I think I'll just leave it with create your most important goal and communicate it to your organization, and you will see immediate results.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. So, tell us about your book, Jim. I know I'm not. When I should have looked actually. When was your book released? Is it a recent publication, or has it been out for a while?
So it was released in February.
Okay.
I don't know how long to wait before I say it isn't a recent publication anymore.
Oh,
But it was released.
I wrote a book in 2015, and I still think it's recent in my head. And then I have to like look at the date and think actually it's coming up to nearly 8 years ago. So yeah, I don't think I think it always feels recent because so much effort goes into writing a book that you kind of it always seems to be really close to you and in your memory. But anyway, sorry, Jim. Yeah, so I'm definitely calling February 2023 recent. So yeah, you've got that.
So it's called Business Strategy Realized: The Business Hierarchy of Needs,
Mm,
and it's available on Amazon. And it basically walks you through the logic behind what we've talked about today, and articles, or the equivalent of short blog articles, on each of the 29 elements
okay.
and how they fit. Now, what I've done is I've added a whole series of workshops and workbooks that readers can download free of charge. And so if any of your readers are interested in finding out, or your listeners are interested in finding out more about it, if they go to www.strategyrealized.com, you can see excerpts from the book. You can see the podcasts that we've done on it. But in the resources tab, you actually can download a workbook that will allow you to begin the process of creating your own unique business hierarchy of needs.
Excellent. I've just put that into I'll put that into the show notes. I've just clicked on that. Yeah. So yeah, that's a page definitely well worth visiting. There's some good resources on there, and obviously there's the information about the book as well, which is excellent. So yeah, so that, well, good luck with the book. I mean, obviously not good luck writing it because you've written it, but good luck with and it's a great I know from my own experience, having kind of codified your ideas and taken the time to put them into a book. It's a very cathartic experience, isn't it? In terms of just kind of explaining your ideas in a book it really kind of sharpens your kind of awareness of how challenging it is sometimes to explain them when you've not got the ability to sort of be there yourself. So yeah, it's a great tool, and well done on that. Anyone who has the time and tenacity to write a book, I have a huge amount of respect for, having been through it myself.
Thank you.
Any other links you want me to put into the show notes, Jim? So I've got your LinkedIn profile, if that's okay, because that's always a good way for people to reach out to you directly. I'll put the strategyrealize.com URL in there as well, so people can find that. Anything else that you want to draw people's attention to, Jim?
So the website for my consulting firm is
Yeah,
www.group50.com.
yeah.
And it talks about inside that website, there's a lot of information. I actually spend a lot of time writing. And in the blog, there's over 200 articles that we've written over the last 20 years about various topics in strategy, in supply chain, continuous improvement, um, and something we call anti-strategy,
Mm,
which is an interesting read because it's about what happens when senior leaders who are very talented and feel like they need to do things. And if there isn't a most important goal an appropriate amount of direction, they often do things that are counter to the future of the business. We call that anti-strategy.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, excellent. Okay, Jim. Well, look, I've got that your Group 50 URL as well. I'm going to put that into the show notes as well. So anyone listening who wants to find out more about what you've been talking about today can go to that, and obviously have a look at the book as well. And yeah, so I just want to say thank you so much, Jim, for sharing your insights. It was a very, very strong alignment, I think, between our work that you do, obviously your work around the Kaizen and getting people together and really kind of getting involved in that is really important. And I think, kind of thinking about what we do, which is the sort of that whole, helping leaders to be able to kind of articulate that most important goal and that hierarchy. I think there's definitely a synergy there that, maybe we explore offline and as a conversation, because I think there's definitely some mutually supportive work that we're doing there. So it's always nice to speak to a kindred spirit on that sort of thing. So I'm going to sign off, Jim, and wish you all the best. And thank you so much for your insights and sharing with us your ideas and giving us this sort of really clear concept that you've got. And hopefully we'll maybe get you on the show again at some point in the future and talk a little bit more about some of these 29 principles that you've mentioned a few times as well. And we can maybe go into some of those in a bit more depth.
Well, you're quite welcome, Craig. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast and talking to you in the future about how we can leverage some of our synergies is the best offer I've had today.
Excellent. Okay, well, it's still early for you, so you may get a better one later on. Who knows? So, excellent. All right, Jim, I'm going to sign off the recording. So, thank you so much, and and thank you on behalf of our listeners as well.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.